where Paul just wrote, and this is a condensed version, this is the shortcut version, but so in Christ Jesus, you are all children of God through faith. In other words, as Brendan Ranning writes, you're Abba's child. You're the king's kids. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, nor Astro nor Dodger, nor Thunder nor Nick. Have you been following that? The Knicks. I've never believed that God favors a specific group of people anymore, but right now it seems like he favors the Knicks a little bit. I don't know how that's happening, but anyway. But there's neither slave nor free, nor is there male or female, for you're all one in Christ Jesus if you belong to Christ. You're heirs according to the promise. And that the whole premise of this series is we need to treat one another like that. Like we're all dearly valued by God, regardless of our background, regardless of our age, regardless of our gender, regardless of how big our paycheck is, regardless of how long we've lived, wherever we've lived. I had somebody graciously point out to me today, this week, I was listening to him tell a story, and he's like, well, in the South, that's what they do. And I'm like, are we not in the South? And he's like, no, this is Texas. We're our own country. It's and I'm starting to understand that better all the time. You guys, I'm surprised. It's all the transplants that laughed at that. It was not any of the locals. They're like, well, duh, they teach you that in the first grade, right? Texas is Texas. And, but anyway, I have to be reminded of that once in a while. But I'll just remind you, there's neither Yankee nor, I don't even remember what the Confederate, nor Texan. See, now there's 3 groups, not just the 2 groups. We're all rednecks, right? I shouldn't say that, but anyway. That's been the bottom line for this whole passage. And today's message is going to be somewhat brief but important. And it has to do with the fact that it's about all of us who are the children of God. And there's this beautiful story, if you want to turn to Matthew chapter 19, you can. But I want you to imagine this. I don't know, I kind of picture Thanksgiving, but we're a long way from Thanksgiving, man. We got 5-6 months to go till we get there again, But I picture a big Thanksgiving feast, and the whole family's gathered around the table, and it's loaded with food, whatever food you put on your table at Thanksgiving. Maybe it's all lentils, or maybe it's all meat. I don't know what you do at your family gatherings. For my mom, it was always the meat-pocalypse. It was turkey and roast beef and steak and whatever else she could pull out of the bottom of the freezer and thaw out in time to cook for Thanksgiving. Because she just wanted to make sure everybody had something they liked. But one thing there was always plenty of was gravy. Because she knew that if there wasn't plenty of gravy, I wouldn't get any. Because I was the youngest at the table, and I wasn't going to fight as hard as everybody else. And so, we had this monster gravy boat. You could just about go swimming in the thing, right? And so it didn't matter what the meat was. There was going to be it wasn't always good gravy, but it was gravy, and it was there. And everything was more tolerable because of the gravy. Whether it was the meat or the broccoli that they would put on the table once in a while and make you eat 1 or 2 pieces of. But that gravy made everything better in so many ways. But I remember one time being at my cousin's house, and they had 9 kids at their house. And Sylvester and Lalan, my dad's sister and her husband, they did everything lean. She had a 2.5 minute, I don't know, what's an egg timer? 3 minutes or 2.5 minutes? What is it, an egg timer? Anyway, they had an egg timer. Not for the eggs. It was kept in the bathroom for your showers. You had until the timer quit, and then the next kid was pulling you out of the shower, and you were getting in whether you were done or not. So if you went to school with shampoo in your hair, that was your fault. She had everything down to science, including how much gravy was there and who got it first. The adults at the table got the gravy first, then the oldest kids. And then from there, it was kind of a free-for-all, and just you hope you got a chance to lick the bowl because there was only so much gravy. But church isn't that way. We don't save the best for the most important people. We don't save the best for any class, any color, any age, any wealth, any demographic whatsoever. There's plenty to go around. And so today's about please pass the gravy. Let's share generously what's been shared so generously with us. Now, we're going to use an illustration today from Matthew 19, where Jesus is trying to teach the disciples something. And I want to make sure you understand the context of this verse. Like if you read the verses ahead of this, Jesus has just spent some time talking about divorce and what was taking place in their culture. And it's not an accident that right after that he starts talking about kids and their importance and their value. There's a context for this conversation that's super important. But it says in verse 13 of Matthew 19, then people brought little children to Jesus for him to place his hands on them and pray for them. But the disciples rebuked them. And in your mind, aren't you like, why? Why not have the kids at the table? And Jesus responds to them, and he doesn't explain their action. Instead, he rebukes it. He's like, Jesus said, let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. And when he placed his hands on them, he went on from there. Now, I love that part because it doesn't really say much about placing his hands on them, but I don't think it was the way my uncle used to place his hands on his kids, with the back of the hand. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't discipline your kids, but I think what Jesus did in that moment, he didn't call them up and give them a whooping. He called them up and gave them a blessing. He wanted them there. And he placed his hands on them. Why? Well, we already heard in the verse. People were bringing the kids were coming to be blessed, to have Jesus lay his hands on them and give them a blessing. And this was a beautiful picture. Basically, what I want to talk about today is just this, that the next generation doesn't belong at the table someday. They belong at the table now. That's why you notice our students serve communion. Our students play music for us. I don't know what the next season is going to be like when our drummer abandons us and we don't have kids workers, in the nursery that are just a little older than the kids that they're serving. I know they feel lifetimes older, but in the perspective, like most of us are 50 years older and they're still at least in, within a decade or two of the kids that they're serving. I don't know what that's going to look like for us. But I know that we need to adopt the attitude of Jesus towards children, and I think this church has. It's a beautiful thing, but we need to continue it, whoever we have. And here's what I want us to notice from this passage in Matthew 19. People were bringing children to Jesus, and the disciples tried to push them away. Jesus not only allowed them to come to him, he told the disciples, allow them to come to me. But really what Jesus was doing in that moment was calling children to him. And what's ironic is that the disciples that were trying to push them away or hinder them, they were nothing but teenagers themselves, And I know our teenagers, they're practically adults. But remember that the early church, that was built on the shoulders of basically teenagers and young adults. That's who these disciples were. And they didn't want the little kids coming. Maybe they wanted Jesus all to themselves. When you're immature, you feel that way. When you're immature, you feel like the church should be all about you. You should have Jesus all to yourself. And other people, they can just butt out. It's me and Jesus. But Jesus says no to that. He's like, don't get in the way of any of my kids coming to me. Don't let anything hinder them. So Jesus called these kids to the table. He didn't just allow them, he called them. And he built his mission on their backs. So the bottom line today is the church belongs to every generation. All at once. It's not someday when you get to be in the church, then you do things your way. We're here. We're together. We're in this together. As Abba's kids. How do we hinder kids from coming to Jesus today? He gave us a clear warning, the same as he gave the disciples. Do not hinder them. I think it's important that we think about how we potentially hinder people, keep them from coming to Jesus. I was doing some training this week, receiving some training this week that I actually shared with our worship team, or not our worship team, our leadership team yesterday at our retreat. And one of the things that really struck me was a guy in there who's literally written a book on discipleship, like dozens of books on it, Dr. Bobby Harrington, and on leadership, was talking about an assessment he had his leaders do one time about their disciple-making practices. Were they disciples? Were they disciple makers? Were they making disciple makers? In other words, passing the baton. Are they continuing this to the next generation, as Debbie read about in that beautiful passage? One generation tells the next generation of all the work. That Psalm 145, go back and read that again when you get a chance this week. It's all about the amazing thing God did and making sure that we pass those things from generation to generation in the middle of all that. But as Bobby was talking about this with his leadership team, he had them go through this self-assessment. These were his elders at his church, and he'd served with these guys for a long time. And what he discovered is his elders didn't feel like they were making disciples. Most of them were struggling to even get their own kids to follow. And in that conversation, I can just imagine around the table, the discussion begins to take place, like, what is the future of our church? Like, these kids are the future of our church, and they're all disappearing on us. We're not passing the torch or passing things down or handing things down. And so they felt terribly inadequate. And I think most of us that are in leadership feel that way at times. Like, who am I? Why let me be in this role, or how can I be in this role when this kid is doing that thing and that kid's doing this thing and some of those things? And so we often have to have conversations about that. What does that look like? But what I picked up on in that conversation was this attitude that said, hey, the next generation is going to be in trouble because we don't have any kids around to lead. Well, on the bright side for our church, part of the reason we don't have kids around to lead is because we've been sending them off. We've been bringing them in, building them up, and sending them out. But that's not the only reason. And so we have to look at ourselves, we have to look at our service, we have to look at what we are as a church and who we are and say, do we make room for this generation? And are we focused on sharing our faith with this generation who's not going to be a part of the church someday, but they're here? And so that's one of the things I really appreciate about this body, is the way that you do that and you welcome people to the table. I remember when we were talking about establishing our leadership team, and I don't think Eli probably even knows this, but one of the people we discussed for a long time, we talked about Eli and Kieran, like, should we welcome them to the table? I'm like, it's their senior year. And that wasn't about, hey, they're just going to leave us. No, it was about, do they really have time to help lead a church in their senior year? It's like, I wish we would have got them going into middle school or something, but let's make room for people. Even though there are some things that you need to have a seasoned faith when it comes to leading a church. But I want to talk about, what does hindering look like in 2026? And I wrote down a few ideas about this. Like, I think when our attitude says that kids are a distraction or they're not ready yet, that hinders us from helping them be disciples who make disciples. When we're uncomfortable with the hard questions that they're asking, I'll just be honest, our students have to think about things that were unthinkable when I was a student. Like, do you understand that, like, when I was in youth group, there was a heavy focus on, save yourself for marriage, be kind to these girls, don't have sexual relationship with them until you're married. These were the things that we were talking about. Do you understand that students today are like, okay, so I understand I shouldn't have sex with a person before I'm married, but what about a robot? Is that going to be okay? And you scoff, like, that would never happen. Did you think when you were a kid that you'd be able to carry porn in your pocket and nobody would know? You never imagined that. Our kids are dealing with stuff today that are just unfathomable to us. And the questions that they're having to ask, let's go down a different route. Like, you remember when you were younger and you were excited about being pregnant. And you had no idea, like, is it going to be a boy? Is it going to be a girl? And the day it happens, it's a big deal, you know. And now it's like, you better throw the perfect gender reveal party and make sure you post all the pictures, and the video needs to be just right, and everything's got to be captured and be photogenic, because everybody's going to see everybody's reaction to this whole thing or whatever. And my reaction, like, when Ian was born, and Julie probably, I don't know if she remembers this part or not, but we're in the delivery room, and Bob, who went to our church, who was the doctor that caught the baby, he's like, well, Corey, are you going to tell her what you had? And I said, we've got a baby. Bob says, it's a boy. You know? But now, our kids have the opportunity to decide how to design those children. What gender, what frailties, what strengths. You can literally design your own baby now. Matter of fact, science is there. It's not publicly accessible yet, financially probably, but we're at the point where you do not need a sperm and an egg to make a baby. What about this one? I was talking to the lady that cuts my hair the other day, and she had a baby a couple of years ago, and we just had this conversation. Ladies, if you could have a baby but have somebody else carry it or something else carry it, like, you don't have to go through pregnancy, would you? And some of you that are a long way off from that would be like, of course, how are you going to draw close and get to know that kid and all of those things? But if you had a complicated pregnancy, or you lost a child because of something going on in your body, you know, they now not only have artificial insemination, they have artificial gestation. Would you do it? Makes me wonder how many Unabombers will have run around in 30 years because they didn't have anybody close to them. They had artificial insemination, artificial gestation, and probably a robot raising them with no human touch. You know, it's like, these are the opportunities ahead of us that our students have to ask questions about. They're faced with very difficult questions. And so it's important that the church now help build a faith in them that can help address those questions. I love that our students have had the opportunity to wrestle with tough questions with Lindy and Jake. But I think a lot of us don't understand because we think, well, we were kids once. I'm just telling you, life was different when I was a kid. You know? And it was different when you were a kid. And so we need to pray for our students and pray for our parents, and we need to be a resource in every way that we can. And when we're uncomfortable with the hard questions, what do? I'm reminded of my friend Dave when he knocked on a door in San Diego just offering prayer. And this woman answered the door, and she was big, and she was butch, and she was twice as strong as he was, and she was mad. And he said, I'm Dave, we're walking the neighborhood offering prayer to anybody who needs it. Is there anything I could pray with you about or pray for you about? And she said, you don't want to pray with me. And she was angry. And he said, That's literally what I'm here to do, is pray with anybody who wants to pray. And she said, I need prayer, but you don't want to pray. And he said, well, what makes you think that? And she said, well, my girlfriend and I are in a fight, and I don't know what to do. We're at odds, and I don't know if we're going to be together tomorrow or not. How would you pray with somebody in that circumstance if invited into that moment? What would your prayer be? Dave bowed and prayed with those two women. She called her partner over and said, hey, this guy wants to pray with us. Let's pray with him. And the two of them bowed their head with Dave and the guy walking around with him. Actually, I think it was his daughter walking with him. And Dave just prayed God's blessing on them, prayed that they would know how much they were loved, that Jesus died for them, that he died for us, that he has hopes and dreams for them that we can only imagine, you know. And at the end of the prayer, they were both bawling. Now, he didn't run them to the church and baptize them and make them, you know, engage them quickly in the life of the church. But do you think God used that moment in that couple's life? I do. I think that's kind of how it works. Where would he have gotten if he just started by praying that God would rain down fire like he did in Sodom and Gomorrah? Think those people would have been touched by the hand of God in that moment? It's possible, but I think it'd been a longer reach. So when our attitude says that kids are a distraction, we hinder them. When they think that they're not ready yet, we hinder them. When we're uncomfortable with the hard questions they're asking, we hinder them. When their answers are different than our answers, and it makes us angry and upset, we hinder them. When we resist the ways they challenge our settled theology, we hinder them. I know what I believe about certain lifestyles and certain choices that people are making today. I know what I believe about that. I know what Scripture says about that. I know how the church has interpreted it over the years. I know these things. So it's unsettling at times when my own kids challenge my theology and say, I get it. Do you realize how old that book is? Sometimes they're all sold out on this book is right. But when you grow up in a culture that tells you one thing over and over and over and over and over and over again, and it shapes you into who you are, the church needs to leave room for you to figure out your theology in it. And that should happen through Scripture and prayer like it always has, and community. Part of the reason we have these community groups. When we went through a few months ago on our leadership team, we looked at what are the strengths and the weaknesses, the opportunities and the threats facing the church. One of the things that we identified in there as an amazing strength of ours is the fact that we have a chance to have such great intergenerational interaction with one another. We get to hear the prayers of children in public worship. We get to listen to the preaching of kids a third our age, and I'm being generous. But when we resist the ways students challenge us, and we take a defensive posture instead of listening, trying to understand, and wrestle through those things with them, as opposed to wrestling them, then we hinder them. When we make faith feel irrelevant to the world that people actually live in, we hinder them. I remember one time being challenged about some of the preaching I was doing, and rightfully so. I was working my way through the story of the Bible. I was going through from Genesis to Revelation, and we were dealing with things. It wasn't necessarily the story project, but it was much like it. we were trying to create storytellers, and we were just teaching people how to tell the story every week. And finally, this lady said, she was really upset. Her and her husband left the church. She was the chairman of the elders' wife. Those are challenging times, right, Tom, when the chairman of the elders and his wife aren't happy with what's going on. But this lady, I wish she'd have come to my office and told me about this instead of writing it in a letter way after the fact. But because she was spot on about some things. She's like, you never preach about the tough subjects like this. I realized, well, I'm just trying to preach the Bible. But I could have used these kinds of illustrations as I was preaching the Bible. And I became a better preacher after I listened to what she said about that. It's important for us to stay relevant to what's taking place in the real world that people live in and not just talk about all the same old stuff, so to speak, because the same old stuff isn't the same old stuff. It's a new world. Jesus would use the Old Testament to illustrate the New Testament, but he was still talking to the people of his time. He was dealing with what they were dealing with as he talked through it. And so he would bridge that gap because both are still relevant. The stories are completely relevant. You don't think there's stories that could be told about Israel that would make sense today? Absolutely. That's why in Psalm 74, which we didn't take time to read today, after recounting all the amazing things that God did as he was leading the children out of Egypt, the psalmist writes and says, make sure you tell the next generation. Pass the gravy. They need to hear it. Actually, it was Psalm 78. Verses 4 through 7 say this. We will not hide them. In other words, all these stories, all these truths. We will not hide them from their descendants. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord. And that's what we need to do. So what's that look like in churches today? Well, first of all, group leaders, pay special, I want to make sure you're awake right now. When you gather around your table today, I'd like you to do something kind of like we did yesterday morning when we started our time. Just ask the people at your table that simple question that says, what's the first time you really felt joy or an experience from early in church that you remember that was just a good experience, what you held on to? That'd be a great way to just start your introductions today when we meet in our groups in just a moment. This is not my earliest memory, but one of my latest memories of the beauty of a church. When last week, for almost 2 hours, we celebrated students, right? What God's been doing for such a long time, faithfully in these students' lives. And as part of that, we celebrated and listened to an 18-year-old young woman who stood right here and brought the message in a powerful way, in a courageous way. She didn't let outside circumstances and all the busyness and the distraction of a graduation weekend and family functions keep her from sharing what God had put on her heart almost 6 months before. You probably didn't know that. I didn't introduce Kieran last week, but she had come up to me almost 6 months before saying, God's given me a message. And she challenged me. She said, hey, do you believe that Satan's real? I'm like, well, yeah. Is that not obvious? And then I realized, well, not from my preaching. I needed to talk more about the enemy than I had been. She's like, well, what about hell? Do you believe in a real hell? Well, yeah, I preached a sermon series on it not that long ago called, Hell is Real, even though I hate to admit it, but she's like, we need to talk more about this stuff. I've been in this church a long time. We don't talk about that stuff very much. I'm just telling you that I'm preaching to myself here. We need to let the next generation help us understand more about what we believe because they're hungry for it. This is a generation that's hungry for mentors, by the way. They just don't have as many in their life as you might have had in yours. Will we answer the call to that moment and, more importantly, call them to that moment? This moment of Kieran standing here and preaching, it wasn't the result of a request she made 6 months before. It was a result that a church decided decades ago, we're not going to wait until they're older. We're going to make room for them now at this table because it's too important. It's God ordained. Man, Jesus called the kids to him. He's calling kids to him. And the truth is, he's calling kids that it really doesn't matter what your age is. I know some of you feel like, well, yeah, I'm in my 9th decade. I'm not a kid. Compared to God, you are. You're not even a toddler yet compared to God. In the eternal perspective, you're just getting started. And so you're called too. You're part of this. Jesus is calling young people today. I want to remind you what I shared a few weeks ago from Sarah Young in Jesus Calling. Let my love envelop your outreach to other people. This is what we're to do. That love that Jesus demonstrated, calling those kids to him, putting his hands on them. I don't picture it as a backhand. I picture it as an embrace. Putting his hands on them and embracing them. We need to continue to do that for every generation, every child of God here. And it starts before they're born. We need to embrace Rachel's baby. I don't know what the gender, I don't think the gender's been revealed yet. It's coming soon, I'm sure. But right now, we need to embrace life at every stage. Would you stand as we celebrate and sing together?